Hello viewers, welcome to week 7, lecture 4 of Swayam course on 20th century literary criticism and theory part 1. I am Ashish Kumar Pathak, assistant professor, Department of English, Banaras Hindu University. And in this lecture, I will continue with the discussion of Derridean deconstruction and will be looking at other aspects of deconstruction. For example, in the previous unit, we talked about Derrida's concept of phonocentrism and logocentrism and how Derrida dismantles this tendency of privileging speech over writing or presence over absence. Continuing that discussion in that way, Derrida goes on to deconstruct Saussurian concept of signifier and signified. So as we know that this deconstruction or post-structuralism is a critique of structuralism, and all the principles of structuralism, particularly Saussure's linguistics, are put to scrutiny. So when we talk about signifier and signified, we know that how Saussure looks at sign in two dimensions. The sign, its written image or acoustic dimension is signifier, and the concept that we understand, something that refers to, that concept is called signified. And Saussure goes on to say that this relationship between signifier and signified is arbitrary. Though the relationship between signifier and signified is arbitrary, signified is locatable. Signified is graspable. Signified is something that can be understood, comprehended, and that is how we make sense of reality. Even if that understanding is done because of the intrinsic features, functionings of signs, because of their being different from each other. So, however, this difference is capable of creative meaning. Derrida, puts this signified under erasure. When we say under erasure, in Derridean sense, under erasure means something that is written there. In the slide, I think there is a difference. We can understand like this, that something that is written there. So that is how signified is. So something that is written with a cross on it. It is legible, but at the same time, its status is not sure, not confirmed, right? So it means it is there, but it needs critical examination. Derrida says that this difference will mean presence. Both entities are present. I mean, if Saussure is saying that language conveys meaning by difference, so those different signs are there. Both of the signs are present, and in this way, meaning is generated. Derrida is questioning that proposition. Derrida says that in language, things are not always present. Entities are not always present. So, because everything is not present in language, so language cannot communicate meaning. Signified cannot be located. And in this way, Derrida goes on to say that what is called presence is not a fixed entity. Presence is not a stable entity. Presence is something that is always elusive. So if presence is elusive, so that difference is never going to come to an end, because the moment you are trying to grasp the other part of presence, it will not be there. So in this way, Derrida says that the signified can never be, captured. So the signified is constantly being deferred. So in an attempt to capture the signified, he says, we keep moving from one signifier to another, but we never get to the signified. The signified gets lost in the search. So therefore, signified has been put under erasure. It is there, but it cannot be felt, it cannot be grasped. And therefore, its being there is not confirmed. And in this way, we go into the area of deconstruction. He says that signified means asserting any kind of, or allocating or assigning any kind of meaning to something. But if signified is constantly elusive, it cannot be established, it cannot be located, then meaning is also elusive. He gives an example, or with an example we can understand it. Suppose we use a word meaning, right? So by meaning, if somebody asks you, how will you explain the meaning of meaning? What is meaning? So meaning is something that is meant. Okay, what is meant? I mean this, that is meant. I mean this means some intention is there, some intended thing is there. So what do you mean? Significance of something. From significance, you go to another explanation, means something that is significant, something that is important. Important asserts something's importance. In this way, we find that we keep moving from one signifier to the other signifier. This is endless. This is an unending chain. And in this way, we never get to the signified. So by the similar proposition, we never get to the meaning with any sense of certainty, with any sense of finality. And there, Derrida says that in everything, whether it is a word or it is a text or context, its opposite is always there. At the same time, it is not always there. And in this way, there is a circularity in language. There is a slipperiness in language at the level of understanding. Right? So, concepts cannot be understood in language. And therefore, he says that circularity of signifiers is something that is the nature of language. That is the feature of language. That is the character of language. These signifiers are always elusive, and signified remains an illusion, right? And in this way, what we call meaning, when we think of meaning, we are on a slippery terrain. Meaning is never fixed there to be understood, to be grasped. Even after how much amount of time you spent on it, the more you try to grasp it, the more it slips from your control. So in this way, for example, with another example, we can understand that how do you define a concept called university? So we try to define university like university is an assemblage of faculties. University is an assemblage of libraries. University is a place where students are thronged. So in a way, we find that to define university, we go to some other concepts like classroom, library, students, various components with the help of which we try to make sense of university. And in this way, we are already into another direction with all other signifiers. So Derrida says that when you look at the nature of sign, it is not simply as Saussure explains it, that a sign can be understood because of its difference from the other signs. He says that if you think of a sign is always a sign of another sign. For example, university is a sign of library, of students, of faculties. So all those signs are there. And if we go to that sign, then again further, deferrals will be there. So, a sign is always a sign of another sign with no fixed meaning. And therefore, there is no possibility of any transcendental signified. Here, his questioning of structuralism comes to its climax, comes to its peak, that transcendental signified is not possible. And how all structuralists, in terms of establishing a grammar or in terms of establishing a lang, which will explain the nature of Perrault, which will validate the Perrault. So that is what Derrida is questioning. Basically, he's questioning that how in any structure you assume a center. A structure cannot be imagined without a center because it is the center which holds the other parts together, which regulates the other parts, which decides the movements of other parts, roles of other parts, functions of other parts. So Derrida is questioning that how that center can be above this free play of signifiers, right? So the center itself will be subject to that free play of signifiers, that it is deciding for the others. So in this way, a meaning is always a meaning of meaning, and there is this indefinite or infinite referral to signifieds. And so with everything, the entity is not there, its trace is there, and that is always half of it. For example, Derrida coins the Greek word pharmakon, which is a remedy, and at the same time it is a poison. So that is how Derrida describes, or he dismantles this understanding of signifier and signified, as Saussure has established in his structural linguistics. So Derrida goes on to say, and another concept that he says, that language is always in a state of dissemination. So he posits that elements or entities are never fully present because language is in a state of dissemination. What is dissemination? For example, you light an incense stick, and you find that the smoke that is coming off incense stick is in a state of dissemination. Without control, it moves in the atmosphere. So similarly, that is the nature of language. So dissemination is a state of perpetually unfulfilled meaning. So according to Derrida, language is structured as an endless deferral of meaning, and any search for the essential, absolute, stable meaning must therefore be considered metaphysical. And in this way, Derrida is questioning this metaphysical notion, or he is questioning metaphysics. Later on, we'll talk about his juxtaposition of metaphysics and metaphor. So Derrida comes to the conclusion that in sense of dissemination, there is no fixed element, no fundamental unit, no transcendental signified that is meaningful in itself and escapes the ceaseless interplay of linguistic deferral and difference. So this unstable condition entails weaving and unweaving of language and context. And from dissemination in this way, Derrida coins another word called difference. So difference is something from difference. And he says that what is difference? So difference is a blend of difference as well as deferral. So if we look at language, if we look at the nature of signs, it can be understood in this way. A sign is always differing from the other signs. It is different from other signs. This part makes a sign. And the other thing is that whatever is there, whatever part is there, it is constantly in a state of deferral. It is constantly being deferred, as we have seen in the previous examples, like mean, meaning, significant, significance, or university and student library in that context. So this difference and deferral. Deferral means postponement of something. Difference and postponement, they combine together to give sense to Derridian difference. And in this way, he says that these notions of circularity, plurality, indeterminacy, free play, difference, and supplementarity are very crucial to the understanding of the theory of deconstruction. We can look at this map that is in front of us. There we find that three things that Derrida has emphasized so far as the nature of signs or writing or speech is concerned. So the first term is trace, where trace affirms that there are no fixed or finished entities. There are only indications, impressions, imprints, postscripts, footprints of objects that is absent. only formations and not forms. For example, you walk on a sea beach, and Derrida says that writing is very much like those footprints that you see there. So traces are always there. Entities are not there. Formations are there. In this way, signs are always in movement or free play, but forms, fixed forms are not there. Graspable forms are not there. Difference, we have already discussed, recently discussed, that how to differ and not to differ. Only transience and no transcendental signified. Only movement and delay or endless deferral from signifier to signified. So in this way, a state of dissemination. And that is how we understand a sign. A sign, what we try to understand is not that, and at the same time, it is not there. And the other concept is that is of supplement. So how one is getting defined through the other, but the other itself is not complete. It is to be supplemented by the other, either addition or substitution. So what is missing, we try to bring it from there, but what we bring is itself incomplete. It also needs some addition. It also needs some substitution. So to supply a necessary lag in the other. However, to substitute perpetual dependency on that which is required to complete some existing lag. In this way, nothing is complete in itself. So this constant incompleteness, being incomplete, is something that is what Derrida is trying to make us understand. Now, in that context, we have understood the nature of science, we have understood the nature of language in that way, and how, in sense of deconstruction, how do we make sense of a text? So, Derrida comes to the conclusion that a text is no longer a finished corpus of writing, some content enclosed in a book or its margin, but a differential network, a fabric of traces referring endlessly to something other than itself, to other differential traces. So in this way, if we look at a text is always an incomplete thing, right? In which it may be, trying to refer to something, but that reference is never complete. It is constantly being deferred, right? And in this way, this endlessly referring that is what defines the nature of a text. So a text is not a closed entity, as structuralists have believed in. So he says that this interweaving in the text, produced only in the transformation of another text. There are only differences everywhere and traces of traces. And there is no originary trace, because there would be transcendental signifieds had there been one. So only the linkage amount text is the text. And in this way, we understand the notion of intertextuality, that a text is not something that is complete in itself or completed by any other agency, such an author, right? As we have seen that this questioning of author, in fact, it was already there in structuralism, where they were talking about structure. But anyway, they were replacing authors with structure. Structures are making text. So structure was given an centrality. Structure was given a centrality there. While in this context, in this context of deconstruction, even structure is not given a centrality. It is not that there are defined conventions of epics which allow Milton to produce a Paradise Lost. Here the case is that a Paradise Lost is simply something that has been partly written by Virgil's Aeneid or other texts or Iliad or Odyssey by Homer. So a text is not completely written by any structure, but the text is a part of that text partly, then this text itself needs a new epic to complement its meaning. So the role is of author is completely gone. And of course, in this way, the act of reading acquires supremacy. So from the author to reader, this is again a binary opposition that Derrida is dismantling, in which author is always given a central position. He is the maker of the text. He decides the functions of elements in a text. However, Derrida demolishes that thing, and now reader is at the center, the way he makes sense of a text. So in this way, Derrida writes, the essence of a rose is not it is its non-essence, is its odor as it evaporates, the effluvium, what is thrown out, a belch, a fart, the excrements, its dissipation. So, this is very remarkable analogy that Derrida uses. So he says that if you look at a rose, the essence of rose is its smell, right? And the smell of rose is something that is elusive. Similarly, the essence of a text is its non-essence, right? So it is something that decomposes immediately. Effluvium. It is in a state of, transmigration, which is elusive, and that is the essence. So in this way, effluvium designates in general decomposing organic substances. And in this way, Derrida makes his landmark statement, thus a text is a gas, right? So that is what he makes in his work, Glass. So here we find that how, Derrida is talking about text. Etymologically, a text is a cloth, and textus is the form from which the text is derived. Similarly, Lacan, another post-structuralist thinker, he says that a text is like a dream. We can never ascertain what it truly means. Roland Barthes, a French deconstructionist, as we know that Barthes was a structuralist, but in 1966, when Derrida presented that paper, Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences, in that conference, all these thinkers, Barthes, Foucault, they all were present there. And there we find that how, Derrida brought a kind of storm in a cup of tea. So after that, it changed the course of this Western metaphysics or Western philosophy, we can say, and how all these thinkers, they became post-structuralists. So Barthes, in his later phase, in his post-structuralist phase, where he is also a deconstructionist, he writes in his work, From Work to Text, the work is concrete, occupying a portion of book space. The text, on the other hand, is a methodological field. The work can be seen in bookstores, card, catalogs, and of course lists, while the text reveals itself, articulates itself according to or against certain rules. While the work is held in hand, the text is held in language. It exists only as a discourse. The text is experienced only in an activity, a production. The text practices the infinite deferral of the signified. It cannot be apprehended as part of a hierarchy or even a single classification of genres. The text is dilatory and plural. So here we find that how a text is associated with plurality of meaning, multiplicity of meaning, indeterminacy of meaning. A text has always two levels. One is conscious level, that is the level of linguistic representation, and the other is subconscious terrain of a text. So that is how language is always in a state of flux. Meaning is always in a state of flux. And in this way, instability of contextual meaning, that also comes to the fore. So if a text is always indeterminate entity in terms of language, so the context of text is always changing. So there is an instability, and context is not fixed. So the same endless deferral with supplementarity and traces is found in contextual meaning. Context is boundless in two ways. Any given context is open to further description, and there is no limit to what might be included in a given context. So, in other words, any context can be grafted into the context it tries to describe, yielding a new context. And this way, this word grafted is important in that context. So Derrida says that there is always another mental, emotional, spiritual, imaginative context built in that supplement for the given context. Right. So for Derrida, contextual meaning decomposes because it can be grafted onto other contexts. For example, a simple thing that we can try to understand that suppose, there is a son who is going with his mother in the marketplace, and he is insisting on mother giving him an ice cream. And the mother says, "Not now, darling." That is the response of a mother to her son. However, when she is making this statement, superficially or on the surface level, at the conscious level, it may be related to the request of that child. But there may be another context, and she may be aware at that moment of some other context when she is remembering the days of her youth and some lonesome moment with her husband, and then making this context, "Not now, darling." It has an altogether, it is hinting in direction of another kind of meaning. So in this way, context is also in a perpetual flux. And therefore, text is a guess. It is quite justified, an elusive entity. So Derridian deconstruction in that way urges us to think beyond what is given as absolute knowledge into the area of unheard or unthought. To deconstruct is to do and undo ceaselessly. To undo is not the same as to destroy, but rather it is akin to decenter, to constantly destabilize what has been done and to rigorously demystify what is received in the name of knowledge. To deconstruct is to examine minutely in order to dismantle conventional hierarchies in the given system to arrive at an exactly opposite position. So, a deconstructionist approach includes a disciplined identification and dismantling of the potentialities of the textual power. In this way, the text is shown to read against itself through the exposure of what might be called the textual subconscious, where meanings are directly contrary to the surface meaning. And in this way, the text is multiple, disunited with shifts and breaks, and therefore aporias, blind spot, or fault lines are always there. So in this way, I come to the end of this lecture, and in the next lecture, we'll be reading more about post-structuralism and deconstruction. Thank you.